Hello everyone, hope you're well. This is the third session now in our little series that we're looking at in our hub groups to do with New Testament prayer. And I'm going to be reading from Colossians 1, 9 to 14. It says this: "For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of His will through all wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please Him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, so that you may have great patience and endurance, and giving joyful thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of His holy people in the kingdom of light. For He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son He loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." So, in the last couple of sessions, we've looked at a couple of the prayers of Jesus. We looked at the Lord's Prayer, and then last time Mark spoke a little bit about the prayer of Jesus found in John 17. And what I wanted us to focus on for the next two sessions are on two of Paul's prayers found in his letters. And the one that I've just read is obviously in his letter to the church at Colossae. And Paul wrote this while he was under house arrest in Rome, somewhere between 60 and 62 AD. And it was written with Timothy. Timothy was with him, and it was carried by this man called Tychicus with another person called Onesimus, that you've probably heard of, and it was carried to the church at Colossae. And they were probably also carrying, just out of interest, they were probably also carrying the letter to Philemon and also the letter to the Laodicean church, which is obviously now lost. Colossae is in southern Turkey and in a region called Phrygia, and it's probably true that Paul never visited this church. Certainly at this point he had never visited it. And he actually starts in that passage that I read by saying that he had heard about them. He'd heard about what God was doing in the church. And the church was probably founded by this guy called Epaphras. And verse 7 and 8 of chapter 1 actually says, when in the letter to the church, "You learned it from Epaphras," that's the gospel, "our dear fellow servant, who is a faithful minister of Christ on our behalf, and who told us of your love in the Spirit." So it's probably true that Epaphras took the gospel to the Colossian church, and Paul heard about what was going on there, the good things that God were doing, and so when he's in prison with Timothy, he writes the letter. And there's two things about prayer to point out straight away. There's a little insight into prayer, the prayer life of Paul. The first thing Paul tells us is that they hadn't stopped praying for the church at Colossae. Ever since they'd heard about them, they hadn't stopped. And secondly, it says that we pray continually. And it really just gives us this insight into Paul as a man of prayer, that he was continually praying for this church at Colossae. And even though he'd never visited the church, he was like constantly holding them up to the Lord. And it really reveals Paul's heart for the early church and for the church as it began to grow in Asia Minor, Turkey today, and into Europe. Paul had such a heart for these new communities, and he prayed for them constantly. And I think Paul reveals that for him, prayer really was a lifestyle. And I think that's something we should be aiming for. I think we should be aiming to develop that for ourselves and as a church, that prayer is just such a lifestyle. It's part of how we live our lives. It's part of how we go about our day. It's part of how we go to work and how we do all the things we have to do. That everything is soaked somehow in this experience of continual prayer. And I really think it's possible. I really think it's attainable for us to live that sort of life. But all that aside, the main thing I want to say, and the interesting thing that I want to say about this prayer, is that it isn't really a prayer, but rather a record of what Paul prayed. And I suppose in that sense is a record of one of the oldest prayers in the Christian faith. And this is amazing. If you maybe you've never noticed this before, but actually what's happening here is that Paul is actually telling the church at Colossae he's telling them what he prays when he prays for them, and he's actually telling them that he actually, in this instance anyway, he's been praying one thing for them. He's actually only been asking God for one thing for the church at Colossae, and it's this. It says, "We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives." He's continually praying that they would be filled with the knowledge of the will of God. And everything else that I read, everything else that follows that request to God is, if you like, a sort of consequence or a product of that prayer. So it says that they may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, so that they may bear fruit in every good work, that they grow in the knowledge of God, that they're strengthened with power, so they may have great endurance and patience, so that they will be joyfully thankful to the Father. So if you get it, maybe you read it slightly different to me, but this is my understanding of what I think Paul's written here, is that Paul is saying that when we are filled with the knowledge of God's will by the Spirit, it has this incredible impact on our lives. We please God, we bear fruit, we grow, we find strength, and we find joy and gratitude. And for the church at Colossae, these were things that they definitely were going to be needing. I mean, we need them anyway, but they were about to enter a period, within 2 years probably, of great persecution, when Nero blamed the Christians for the fire of Rome in 64 AD. A great persecution broke out against the Christian church and many of these new communities. But I just think this is a really good thing to notice, that and therefore an incredibly powerful prayer for us to be praying over each other, that we are continually praying without ceasing, that we are filled with the knowledge of God by the Spirit through all wisdom and understanding. And as we pray that over each other, as we pray that over the Harbour Church, as we pray that over our own lives, as we pray over our Christian brothers and sisters, then we will see this incredible development of growth and life and joy that comes from being filled with the knowledge of God's will. So that's my encouragement to you. Have a chat about it in your group, but I think it would be a really great thing for us to make part of our prayer life, that when we pray for each other, we pray especially that we would all be filled with the knowledge of the will of God through the Spirit, with all that wisdom and understanding that the Spirit brings. I hope that's helpful. See you soon.